Hello and welcome to the webinar Teleports and the 5G Opportunity. My name is Robert Bell and I'm Executive Director of the World Teleport Association. If you're not familiar with us, we are here to advocate for the commercial interests of teleport operators as a unique and valuable part of the total satellite and frankly other services industry. And at the same time to promote excellence in the operations, technology, and business practices of teleport operators so that the quality of service and the range of services being provided increase year after year for the benefit of our customers. Yeah, our today's agenda is very simple, straightforward. After a brief introduction, I'm going to offer you some key insights from the report on which this webinar is based. And then we'll go into a panel discussion with some people who are true experts in the topic of today. One of the important points about all of our webinars are the people who make it possible. Our research efforts as well as our webinars are made possible by the financial support of what we call the industry leaders of WTA, and they are currently Eutelsat, Intelsat, Kratos, Liquid Telecom, and SES. So the major takeaways from this report. Quite an interesting one because 5G is the fastest growing mobile generation in history. And after a couple of years or many years of the 5G hype flowing out of the telecom industry, I personally was kind of startled to find this out. As of today, or as of the publication of this report, there were 59 operational networks around the world with 17.7 million subscribers and 18.7 million handsets out there, which is quite remarkable because when we published an earlier report on 5G back in 2018, the number of handsets available in the marketplace was 0. A lot of this is being driven by China, which has made it a national priority. But it's flowing through South Korea, among other places. And of course, if you just pay a little attention to advertising, certainly in the country nearest you. The conclusion of the report, and we'll see if our members of our panel here agree with this, is that much of the excitement about 5G among teleport operators and satellite operators, is quite justified. Not necessarily in the short term, perhaps, but very much in the long term. And that's because 5G is more than just a mobile standard. It is a very different kind of standard that offers what is expected to become a unified network platform. And that's going to have several major impacts upon our part of the industry, because typically satellite considers cellular backhaul to be an important market. But if you flip it around and look at it from the point of view of the mobile network operator, only about 1% of all backhaul traffic travels over satellite, so it's not very important to them. But you get into 5G and you're talking about the ability to seamlessly integrate technologies, including satellite, right into the core operating platform. And also that platform is going to bring with it the latest developments in virtualization, in software-defined networking, in cloud services, and so on. So we end a cycle in which this industry has to continuously reinvent the wheel, if you will, in its own independent silo, and instead be able to participate in the massive movement into these fields in the future. And the other piece of good news is sort of it's a good news, bad news story. Rural rollout of 5G is expected to follow by some time its introduction into dense urban areas for the usual reason that it's a lot more profitable to serve a lot of customers in a small area than the reverse. But the mobile network operators outside of urban areas do plan a near-term focus on what I can only call satellite verticals, on maritime, on industrial zones that are in relatively undeveloped areas, in islands of connectivity, whether they're resorts or something else. So there is going to be business, and it's going to be focused on the sweet spot of satellite service providers, which is obviously good news for us. So to either debunk what I just said or agree with it or expand our understanding of it, we have a great panel, a mix of service providers and the people who have to build the technology that those services ride on. And they begin with Samir Hassanali, who is the head of cellular backhaul and trunking at ST Engineering iDirect, comes to us from Chile, Canada. Will Mudge, who's the Vice President of Engineering Operations at Speedcast from somewhat warm Florida. Scott Mumford, CEO for satellite services at Liquid Telecom, who's based in the UK, and Richard Sward, who is the Senior Vice President for Premium Enterprise and Mobile Operators at Comtech EF Data, and he's based in Dallas. So, gentlemen, welcome to our webinar. So the panel discussion is finally here. The reason that we are all here, and we've got a number of interesting questions, I think. So we'll start with the easiest one, which is really more about the past than the future, but it's been noted by so many people, and it's being noted increasingly by the mobile network operator community, that satellite has become a much more competitive alternative for backhaul than it historically has been, when it has historically been the last resort, if you will. So why is that? Sir Will, how about you?
Yeah, I think satellite's become more competitive because we've seen a cost reduction in the market and bandwidth. By moving that price point down, it's really allowed us to provide more data to customers, which we're seeing a large increase in data demands over the years. And I think we're going to see a continued growth in bandwidth, which will continue to drive pricing down as we start to see LEOs come online. So I really think the growth of satellite has brought the price down to become a more competitive option to running a fiber to many of these places. Probably a short answer to it, but I wanted to give Samir a chance to come back to it as well.
I think, absolutely. And I think it's, I would say, like, high throughput satellite has certainly contributed to the decrease of the cost of the bandwidth. Like, you get smaller antennas, and KU and KE are more mainstream for cellular backhaul, as per the project we've been deploying and have deployed and are deploying today. And then I also think that the solutions themselves, like the VSAT solutions, they allow you to overbook capacity, they do dynamic adjustments, and they allow you to get very high efficiency, so you get the maximum number of bits from your satellite bandwidth. So that has contributed to the decrease of the cost of the satellite. So, and then you have more things coming up in the future, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, how about you? You have to deal with this every day in the markets you serve.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of what Will was saying around satellite bandwidth coming down in price, although it's very regional, so pricing is still quite high in certain markets. Satellite operators still profiteering a little bit out of that. Obviously, being in the Africa market, commenting on that particularly. I think also around what Samir was saying around some of the more efficient in terms of bits per hertz that you're getting because of the ground segment capability. I will argue a little bit with him around the HTS side, not because you're not getting more bits per hertz in terms of the throughput on those specific beams, but you do need more beams to be able to cover a wider geographical area. So it's quite specific in terms of regions where that's really coming in. But I think it's a combination of all factors. We're just seeing a lot more innovation and commitment to development from both the satellite manufacturers as well as the ground segment operators that are yielding a more efficient cost per bit.
Interesting.
Scott, maybe to add to it a bit, I mean, the customers are part of that too, right? And you see that piece of it a lot, right? Africa, you mentioned, we do a lot in Africa as well, but actually seeing an uptake in the market is helping that business model just as well. Efficiency, satellite cost, and customers there to do it. I mean, maybe add on that one a bit too. I think that really makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, customer demand definitely has an impact on that. Not only in terms of being able to, as Samir was saying, oversubscribe the platforms, more efficiently, but also sort of running them at, as you're getting more bandwidth through them, you get that improvement in terms of the modulation and coding as your carrier sizes increase and your power levels go up as well. So it is sort of one big development in terms of the whole ecosystem that's pushing us in the same direction.
Richard, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with previous speakers. Price and cost of service is definitely number one. The demand has always been out there. Technical innovations, of course, helps. I'd like to add a third element, and that is we shouldn't look away from the fact that the regulators around the world are getting increasingly frustrated with the fact that there is a connectivity gap between the urban and rural areas. And they're trying to use the tools that they have at their disposal to encourage mobile operators to reach rural areas, and that can be, for instance, tying new licenses for 4G or 5G with the component of a requirement to add coverage to areas that are currently underserved, for instance, and that plays well into the hands of the satellite community, of course.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, you're correct. Of course, I hadn't tied that into the other comments. The other thing, the other small factor in this, and yet I think it's worth mentioning, is it wasn't so long ago when to do satellite backhaul for a cell site, you had to put in a 7-meter antenna. And now, along with the electronics becoming cheaper and more powerful and more flexible, you're putting up really small dishes at this point to do a lot of this service. So it's really been sort of the perfect storm, except in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has allowed, like, it's a combination of what Richard is saying and decrease of the cost of the capacity, but that has also allowed, for example, to roll out like projects, as you mentioned, with smaller masts, the small cells in the ultra rural areas, and different business models as well. That has contributed to the success, or is contributing to the success of cellular backhaul these days.
Okay, well, let's turn to the future. WTA's report said that the excitement about 5G is justified for the satellite community. What's your view? Why is all this excitement rocketing around about 5G? And Richard, let's start with you.
I will put out maybe a little contradicting view here. I think 5G and satellite is massively overhyped. And I think the near-term opportunities are very limited. Long-term, there are some good prospects, but there's a significant amount of confusion in the market, and even a misunderstanding of what 5G really is. Just because you run something virtualized or software defined doesn't make it 5G. That's just the way a building practice. That's just the way how you build and deploy IT infrastructure. It doesn't make it 5G, but it's usually used in the same context, and that's kind of confusing.
So you're really quarreling with this, with the pace of change, right? I mean, that in the near term, there's not much going on for the satellite business.
No, I don't think so. But over a longer period of time, I think it has a tremendous potential and can be a real game changer for the industry, because I think that the fact that the satellite industry and the telecom industry is coming together allows the opportunity for the satellite industry to tap into the massive ecosystem that is 3GPP, that is 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G. There's a significant amount of developers. There's chipsets that we'll get access to as an industry. And this ecosystem will give us new tools and opportunities to deploy our services. And what we will offer the wireless industry is the ability to do ubiquitous coverage. That is one of the great selling points of satellite, obviously, and then it will be seamless roaming between satellite infrastructure and ground infrastructure, and this will, of course, unlock one day a lot of value for customers out there.
I think when we speak of 5G as well, it's not necessarily, as you say, it's not all virtualization, and so although 3GPP mandates for 5G to have those type of architectures, right? But it's also the full ecosystem. Not only is it the platform that you have, the virtualization and so, but it also, like, the non-terrestrial networks are part of 3GPP today, and it's about LEO and MEO constellation, high altitude platform, interoperating with the terrestrial world, just as you mentioned, Richard. So it's the full ecosystem which is making, which is creating this excitement for satellite service providers and the business itself. It's not really the technology in terms of very low latency and very high throughput and so on.
Sure, no, and I think that's a very profound comment. So Scott and Will, we've just been hearing from two gentlemen who are in the business of selling technology. You're in the have to be, no doubt, reluctantly in the business of buying it. How does the same question look from your point of view? Scott, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, certainly at the moment, not really seeing a huge deal of demand for it on the satellite side. I think really the interesting point here is the move towards handset-based user consumption. Not not just in terms of in our personal lives, but in our professional lives, and that ability to be able to access your cloud-based systems from everywhere. Now, whether that's through 4G, LTE, 3G, terrestrial broadband, satellite broadband, it's really irrelevant. It's more just a case of being able to ensure that as a user, you have access to the bandwidth when you need it. Now, I think the excitement around the satellite side of that comes is that we're expecting, the deployment and push into the more rural areas, and the ability for the satellite industry to be able to provide that. I think the jury's really still out on that as to whether or not that's, how quickly that's going to happen. I think, we're probably more likely to see an increase in demand from the mobility sector around the aero maritime requirements, the cruise ships and so forth, before we start to see the major rural deployments from the MNOs, just generally because the population densities in the rural communities are generally fairly low, and the costs are still relatively high to set up. There also definitely needs to be some advancement in terms of the approach that regulators are taking, specifically around the African countries, and obviously as our prime market. There's still a lot of benefits that could come from a more unified regulatory approach across the continent and countries, rather than every country having specifically unique regulatory standpoints and pricing. But look, I think it's an interesting time and an exciting time in the satellite industry as a whole at the moment in terms of the development that's going on. And I think 5G is really just a part of that excitement, because we're all waiting to see whether it takes off to be the behemoth of a technology platform that we're all hearing it's going to be.
Well, indeed, and I mean, whenever anybody tells you that 5G is the answer to rural connectivity, you just laugh them off the stage, because it's risible as an idea that a small cell, low latency technology is going to serve rural areas. I think as a unified platform, it will help, but I found that argument from the telecom sector particularly ridiculous. Will, how about you?
Yeah, I think there's a few points, right? And I think maybe looking at the word excitement, right? First, the new is always exciting, right? 5G is a step on the technology path, and fundamentally, we're all technology geeks here. We all like seeing satellite progress. It's kind of our bread and butter. So we're all excited to see, the technology progress down the path that we all want it to, right? We see satellite becoming more mainstream to the things that we want, and I think that's adding a huge bit of excitement that we're seeing good roadmaps around that. But the other side of excitement is probably the negative side of it, right? This is affecting us directly, right? Because they are taking something from us, right? They've taken part of the C-band and they're giving it to the MNOs to be able to provide this service, and that makes us move our services around. It makes some of our satellites obsolete. It makes some of our Earth stations have to change, and unfortunately, it's not consistent globally. So you have to kind of look at each country globally on how that affects us. Now you got to go to teleports, and you got to deal with 5G interference. You got to add filters and everything else. So depending on where you're at, it has pros and cons, right? From an Intelsat or a Eutelsat perspective, they're probably a little upset that they're losing part of their spectrum, but at the same time, they're getting compensated for it, so they're excited about that. From a Speedcast perspective, we have to go in and rework our teleports to deal with 5G, work with the FCC on licensing, add filters, which Comtech and STI Direct love us for all the stuff we get to buy from the new services. So we're excited about that as well. But for us, I think the biggest piece of the word excitement in this particular question is how it's going to change the expectations of users, right? I personally expect 5G to follow a similar path to 4G when it came out, right? It's an improvement on what we have, and it's great, right? But it changes everyone's expectations, right? If anyone got an old GSM phone in their hands, they would throw it away as a dinosaur these days, because we're too used to our iPhones, having our email close at hand and working very quickly. And 5G is only going to up that experience, right? The ability to stream video or get your emails even faster. It's become, just a general requirement of life that you have access to these things. When you look at a commercial maritime ship as an example, they want to be able to FaceTime with their loved ones on Christmas. When you have COVID, they want to be able to connect and have the same interaction like we do on this webinar. The fact that we can do a webinar, all of this is driven because we're seeing this growth in what our expectations are from the technology that's driving 5G is a huge step that pushes that forward, which is going to force all of us to be able to provide more data to the end users at the end of the day. So regardless of the pain that we have to go through, it's a step in the right direction, in my opinion. And I think that's where the excitement comes from.
Yeah, I think the C-band angle you added there is interesting, because much of the hype and excitement around 5G is actually a play by the telecommunication industry and MNOs in particular to get access to more spectrum and get access to that spectrum at the low cost, obviously, because I took a look at the C-band auction this morning. It's above $80 billion at this point. This is $80 billion that the North American MNOs have to pay to get the rights to the spectrum. And that is coming out of their pocketbooks. That's $80 billion that they cannot invest now in CapEx and infrastructure. That's taxation that goes to the FCC and the US government. So
a member of our audience just poses the provocative question: did the satellite industry get played by mobile in turning over some of its C-band? We're not going to actually drill into that, but I think it's an interesting way of framing the issue that we're all aware of. But I want to move on to another couple of questions, which is really okay. So we've now framed it to say 5G is going to be great for the mobile operators for a while. It's going to take some time, and it's going to be selective in its implementation in our industry. And of course, meanwhile, we're dealing with the negative effects of it. But what, in thinking about the next step in here, or in 2 years, 3 years, whatever it may be, where do you think the markets will emerge for satellite backhaul? And Will, since you finished up, why don't we just return to you, because I know you were thinking about this on behalf of Speedcast.
It's interesting, but again, I think we see it as kind of a growth step, right? A lot of where these cellular backhaul places are, I think your report expounded it very well. You know, the mobile network operators aren't going to go in and put a brand new 5G standalone system out into these rural applications where you got 1,000 people, you know, maybe to do these backhauls. What they may do is take the old equipment they had from the cities and move it out to the markets, and then eventually in a few years we'll see the growth of 5G out to these areas. So, you know, I think from my perspective, I don't particularly see a lot of growth in cellular backhaul other than growing data rates, because 4G will be moving out to rural areas and the data rates. I think the locations are probably pretty well known, other than expansion, normal global growth. I think where we'll really see it is not necessarily satellite backhaul, but we'll see a general growth in total data rates. Happy to be contradicted on this one. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I bet you are happy to be contradicted in that.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there, Will. We'll see an increase in bandwidth. Of course, there is a consumer demand out there that is big and needs to be fulfilled. What will also emerge over time, I believe, is a lot more of the enterprise opportunities, both public safety, military, and IoT. I think has a very bright future in the world of 5G. One of the great things that comes with the building practice of 5G is the ability to localize your services. So if you're an enterprise, you can build your own private network and run your services locally there without having to take it back to an MNO, and you can secure and take care of your data locally. And I think this is something that is really attractive to many. Previously, it has only been able to be solved by Wi-Fi and other technologies, but with 5G, there will be a lot more opportunities to innovate and platform. And 5G is really a platform for innovation. So I think enterprise is one of the more exciting opportunities that I see emerging over the next few years.
Just to build on that,
there's been a lot of press recently, and I think a lot of it's justified around Nokia's 4G LTE private networks that are, again, being, as you say, being rolled out in the enterprise net space. So it's already happening.
It is.
So I think we should nevertheless separate, because your question was about the term of 2-3 years, right?
Yeah.
And in 2-3 years, certainly, there's going to be a lot of non-standalone platform base station, number one. Number two, there's going to be coexistence of 4G and 5G for a long period of time. It's not going to disappear. 4G is not going to disappear right away. And if you look at the NSR statistic, then you can see 5G is not going to kick off before 2023, 2024. And then with COVID, probably this is going to be delayed slightly. What is really driving, what will be driving the backhaul market beyond like the 5G, it's also the new constellations like LEO, MEO. MEO is going to drive a lot of traffic for backhaul. As Richard said, it's also the private LTU or private 5G. But we also see markets in the government defense space and also in maritime. So growth in cellular backhaul, not necessarily through 5G, at least for the 2-3 years. And then slow growth of 5G after 3 years or so.
That's interesting.
That's right too. One thing I want to add to both Richard and Samir, though, I think their points are completely valid. The thing that we might see as well is a growth in availability requirements too. When we start talking about MEO, LEO options, and you look at rain fade, or when you're looking at lights out factory operations, right? If they lost the fiber link, for example, they want to make sure they have continuity to it. So I think there may be an option for more increased availability numbers for it. So that might become another driving factor.
Absolutely, and I think we should also see the fact that we also always speak of 5G and we talk about small cells and about millimeter waves, but that would be really in the urban areas and every in-building service, knowing that even with 5G millimeter waves, once you pass a glass door, then you lose your communication. So there's going to be 4G and 5G for sure. And opportunities is also in venues and for first responders or so for having satellite backhaul. I think it's not all 5G millimeter waves all over in small cells. I don't think it's going to be the case.
Well, that brings us really to this question that and I think we've in many ways answered it, but what typically happens when a new mobile generation is introduced that's a significant leap is that it tends to drive upgrades of previous generations, whether it's from 2G to 3G, 3G to 4G, and so forth, independent of, seemingly independent of the latest generation, and yet linked by the change in expectations that Will referred to. Do you expect to see some of that? Oh, and I guess I have to name somebody to speak to that. How about you, Scott?
It's a tricky one, Robert, to be perfectly honest. I think, as Will was saying earlier, I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. MNOs are interested in one thing and one thing only, and that's making profit. So I think, you know, there will be some there'll be to use a satellite term, dual illumination periods that are run for quite a long time, where they're running 3G, 4G, and 5G within the same areas. But I think I also agree with what Will was saying earlier around the fact that the MNOs, I think, will move their 3 and 4G infrastructure out of the main metros as 5G sort of takes more of a hold in those high density areas, and the business growth for satellite operators will come from increased bandwidth and the moving of those 3G, 4G nodes out of the main metros. But will the arrival of 5G sort of force the MNOs to upgrade? I mean, it's a cost decision and a handset decision. The same as is everywhere.
And there's a disparity between the regions.
You know, Samsung, iPhone are busy releasing 5G.
Scott, we're having some trouble with your connection. You want to repeat yourself? Oops. We're having serious problems with this connection. Samir,
Yeah,
sorry, Samir jumped in and I was just wondering what he said, Robert.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Samir.
So what I was saying is, I think there's a lot of disparity between the regions, like between continents, between countries, between even the regions. And if you look at Japan or China or Korea, yes, for sure, like they're pushing for 5G, and even US is planning to shut down its 3G. But if you look at Africa, for example, even Safaricom very recently, I think last week, they stated that 5G is not their focus. What their essential focus today is really to have 4G, 100% 4G coverage. So does 5G push Safaricom for having 4G? I don't think it's 5G which is pushing them. It's just this economics which is pushing them to go for 4G rather than any threat from 5G. I'm talking about Safaricom, for example.
Yeah.
A very important point, and especially in Scott's market, of course, you need to look at the handset availability and affordability of devices at the end of the day before you start deploying a service. And MNOs know this very well. They run the ROIs on their investments all the time. And if you don't have a device ecosystem out there that supports the technology you deploy, you're not going to do very well, right? So Safaricom is making the right decision for their market, obviously, and many operators in the African market as well as Latin American Africa are making the same decisions. If we look at the device ecosystem, and we all carry fairly recent and modern phones, but if you look at the reality of many of the markets that we address in the satellite community are the extreme rural communities where affordability is a key decision factor, whether or not to get service or not. And I just ran across some statistics the other day that the most widely used model of iPhone in the market with the most activated devices is still an iPhone 7, which is a device that is now 5 or 6 years old, but it's still the dominant iPhone in the market worldwide. So while we may have the latest and carry a 5G phone around, that's not the case.
Well, it's all because it still has a button that you can push to the bottom.
Yeah.
Let's just, for a moment, just get some insight into what your involvement in 5G is or may
can you
be.
guys, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Scott. You're back with us. Thank you. Did you want to speak to that question about the changes in MNO decision making, or do you feel it was addressed?
No, I agree with Richard as he was saying about the cost of handsets and that being a major driver in the deployment of 4G, 5G demand. You know, especially around the Africa region, the ARPUs are very low and the availability of low-cost handsets is very restricted. So, you know, it's really a cost decision rather than a technology decision.
Of course it is. So, I mean, just briefly, how to what extent are any of your companies involved in 5G? Sort of how are you, what are you doing to plan for that future? Richard, would you like to lead us off?
Yeah, I can. So Comtech, we're involved in the 3GPP, that is the standardization body for 5G, and we participate through the North American member organization called ATIS, and we're also members of other forums that are influencers into the standardization. And along these lines, we are also involved in several trials together with customers where we demonstrate the capability of 5G and look at the possibilities of the technology to discuss and collaborate with our customer base to see what types of services and solutions they would like to see first.
Interesting. Might as well get Samir while we're here, because again, in the technology business, you have to be several years ahead of the actual market demand.
Yes, so I think from the onset, we've been very involved in the 3GPP standards. We've been participating in 5G projects like those financed by the ESA or the European community. And for example, it was SATIS5, which is about building a test bed for interoperability between the terrestrial and the satellite world. Or SAT5G, where we developed actually a full solution, a full 3GPP solution, which allows a seamless roaming, totally 3GPP standardized. And today we are involved in newer projects, like continuing with the ESA finance, but also with end customers, like commercial customers. And it's in the for maritime vessels, for example, and mobile operators as well. So we are therefore engaged with mobile operators, but also non-mobile operators. It's in the maritime space, in the government space, and we also did the first like a proof of concept for 5G over a LEO constellation for an 8K transfer. So I would say we're very involved. We've been very involved from the onset, and we're going to be increasingly involved over time as well for in 5G.
So, Will, of course, when you're a service provider, you can't get too far ahead of your marketplace. Where are you at the moment in terms of 5G?
Yeah, I'm probably at the bitter moment, honestly. We're dealing with kind of the fallout of the decision-making process and what's happening in the rollout of 5G. So we see satellite operators taking bandwidth away. We have to build new networks, move customers, groom C-band, deal with the interference, buy filters, install them on the different teleports. All of the fallout of some of the decision path that's gone along here to be able to enable it. Really, we're kind of seeing that more than anything else at the moment. We have yet to see, I think Peter put it well, kind of the put and take of, we just gave you all this great bandwidth, now what are you guys going to do for us with it? Hopefully we see that uptake in megabits here before too long.
Thank you. Well, yeah, you're referring to a question from one of our members of our audience, Peter Cressy. Scott, how about you? I mean, I think we've already had your answer to this question, which is, in my markets, not yet. Still with us?
Oh, sorry, Robert. My daughter's decided to start a Zoom call for school and has decided to suck all my internet bandwidth up. So I'm just trying to kick her off. But
Great. By the way, just a great insight into life in January 2021. Yes, please proceed.
I know, it's apologies. Yeah, look, I think we're not seeing a massive, well, we're not directly involved from the satellite side of the business with 5G. We're not seeing any real development from it from an Africa deployment perspective either.
Okay, I want to just step back again. A question from the audience, which I thought was interesting and is above my pay grade.
There are, of course, a few networks being deployed in Africa, but
well, Scott, I'm going to assume that you've
that's
ended.
okay. No worries.
Go ahead.
I was going to say we're being affected by 5G interference and having to fit filters on our C-band infrastructure. There's some cost elements around there that where the networks are being deployed, but they're typically all being in the major metro areas and connected on the fibers. There's certainly very little involvement from a satellite development side with any of the MNOs from the markets that we're operating in currently.
So for right now, you're experiencing the downsides, not the upside. I just want to step over to our technology question, which again came from our audience, because I think Samir, you had mentioned working for the government in some of this. The question is, how does satellite and 5G support network slicing, which is a #1 requirement from at least the U.S. Department of Defense? Can you, without making it so that I can't possibly understand it, can you address that a little bit, Samir?
No, actually, we actually, when we did the proof of concept on the LEO constellation for 5G, then we had applied the slicing, which we mapped to QoS at that time because that was an early solution. But as we foresee, as slicing gets standardized, like it's on the way of being standardized within 3GPP, then we're certainly going to apply it fully and fully leverage the slicing in our solutions as well. Today, I would say we simplified it with QoS levels, but we totally understand that it has to be more elaborate for a full 5G solution as we move ahead towards a full
Richard,
5G solution.
Anything to add to that?
No, we are actively engaged in 3GPP and following the standardization along slicing, and once the technology and the standard is set, that is something that we intend to support in our satellite solutions.
Sure. Okay.
But that's something very important. I would like to highlight that is something very important that we believe will be quite a differentiator for the solutions they had. We think about maritime, we think about enterprise, how you differentiate the different type of traffics, how do you assign the priorities, and how do you guarantee actually end-to-end communication with the best quality of service for your customers.
Well, that is the definition of the problem and the solution. So thank you. We're just looking at a couple of sort of future things that were highlighted in our report. There's a bit of a debate around this issue of IoT. Richard, you put yourself on record as saying you think it's going to be a big deal for a big driver of 5G adoption. Other people don't necessarily agree. Will, I'm going to ask you that question. Where do you think IoT is obviously rolling out at enormous speed, but is 5G going to be an enabler or a driver of continued growth there?
Look, I think 5G onto the individual sensors is going to take time, right? The modems have to develop a bit. The need for the sensor data is going to have to develop. And honestly, they probably need more data from the sensors if it's really going to be a driver for 5G into it. Where I think 5G can add value into IoT is at an aggregation platform. When you look at bringing a whole bunch of sensors together that maybe aren't queuing up very quickly and then backhauling that data out, I think 5G has a much better application as compared to trying to just use 5G to bring 4,000 sensors together. If you could take those 4,000 sensors in the factory, bring them to one computer that can process the data, and then 5G that data out, then that makes a lot more sense for a short-term application of 5G until we always progress like we normally do onto these things.
I think it was one of the contributors to our report who said, I really don't need 5G for my toaster to tell me my toast is done, which I thought was an interesting way of putting it. Other opinions, Scott?
I agree with Will. I don't think 5G is really gonna be a driver for IoT. I think the IoT demand is increasing as more and more platforms start to go through to centralization and cloud applications, or AWS and Google Cloud. But more, I think, an element of the ubiquitous coverage required for sensor connectivity. Again, I think that's going to be a real hybrid approach. If you look at what's going on in the satellite industry with companies like Swarm and Hyber, and from an IoT perspective, if you add that into the 4G, 5G capability, it's rolling out there. I think as you start to get more sophisticated sensors and possibly higher data flow transfers between certain key nodes within the IoT networks, then 5G will probably play a bigger role in that. But it's again, it's just an element in an ecosystem that sort of plays its part in the wider drive for connectivity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, IoT is a very wide swath of services, from narrowband services to timed critical services to high bandwidth services. So there's a whole spectrum of IoT opportunities out there that can be serviced by different types of solutions depending on the use case. And as Will and Scott say, the aggregation business case, where you use wireless to aggregate a number of devices into a central location and from there backhaul, is a very relevant use case and quite frequently used today. We're involved in several large deployments of this sort, supporting mining communities and agriculture and so forth, with aggregating their sensor data into a central location and then backhaul it over satellite. So a very valid use case. Where I think the interesting thing that is happening in 3GPP now is that the thing to have a handset or a device or a chipset communicate directly with a satellite using a 5G waveform is what is really an interesting development. And in all honesty, 5G is not only game in town. The similar development is happening in LoRa as well, and other proprietary standards. But the thing is, with that development, you get access to chipsets that is an order of magnitude less expensive than the chipsets that are available in the market right now. You get access to development community that is fostered and familiar in the 3GPP ecosystem, that is many times bigger than satellite can do by themselves. And then you get the seamless component here of being able to interact between a terrestrial network and terrestrial wireless network and the satellite network, and make those devices roam back and forth. That is incredibly powerful for many use cases. And I have a fair amount of excitement building for that particular market to develop in the next few years.
Yeah, I think when you speak of IoT and 5G, we should also differentiate exactly what you're saying, Richard, like the direct access stuff and what you can, the traffic that you can aggregate. And number two, I think 5G, narrowband IoT, and the activity that is going to happen around it We also have to think that you're going to have fully dedicated satellites for IoT. So will they be 5G, all 5G? Not sure. But what we're certainly going to have is a lot of activity around the IoT. Some of it will be 5G, like direct access, narrowband IoT. Some of it will not. But all these, at the end, drives the market, drives the IoT market, but drives the 5G and drive the other aspects as well.
Interesting. Yeah, at some point I want to run a webinar about exactly that picking up my mobile phone and calling something via satellite. One thing I know is it's going to drain the heck out of the battery. How about this? How about this? I mean, it's going to go from full to half full in about 2 minutes. There's this other thing that's been touted quite often about the future of 5G, which is the idea that because so much video is going to be consumed over the handheld device, and if it's pushed out over 5G, obviously that gives you the ability to see fantastic quality. But we're going to overcongest our terrestrial network, and so there's going to be an increasing drive for video caching at the edge. And I'm always interested in this argument because I first heard it back before the first .com crash. There was a company that was built, whose name is escaping me, for particularly that business model. The contributors to our report were rather skeptical this was actually going to take place, except for one who's already doing it. So I'm curious what you've heard or experienced in this. I'm going to ask actually Samir and Richard this question because Will and Scott, you've both indicated that you're not doing it right now.
So that's an area where we see a lot of traction, and I'd like separate traction from what's the real business behind it. We see a lot of traction because the OTT market has stormed the terrestrial networks. And there are a lot of benefits in leveraging the multicast capability of satellites. So you could position content at the edge of the networks, pre-position content as well. So that would decrease the bandwidth usage by video, and you also increase. Actually, there's no impact. You have a very good quality of experience because there's no buffering. You get quick startup and so on. And it's good for 8K videos or augmented reality and virtual reality. So like mobile operators see the benefits, the broadcasters and content providers see the benefits. Now it has to be translated in a strong business case. And we know that there are regions where the ARPU is so low that will these regions be favorable for those type of applications? That's what we're trying to find out. I think we're in exploratory mode. As you mentioned, this is not a new story. It's been around for a long time, but we've been carefully watching it. We're active in trials with customers, in proof of concept actually. And if you look at the NSR studies, then they say there's going to be a big uptake of IP content distribution. So we're watching this market. We're present in this market. We have all the solutions for that. We're just trying to gauge is there a solid business case behind that or not?
That's very well put. Samir?
Well, I'm one of the ones that are really skeptical to this content distribution market, and not necessarily from a technical point of view. Actually, it's a simple technical problem to solve. Samir has solved it. We have solved it. We've run content distribution proof of concepts over 5G and caching with customers, and technically it's an easy thing to do. But the problem is that the satellite operators wants it, dreams of it, thinks broadcast is of great value to the MNOs, but the MNOs typically don't want it.
Right.
The additional benefits that comes from this commercially is not enough in their mind versus the risk and the perceived lack of control of their infrastructure that they get. I mean, the savings in backhaul are simply not enough to justify some of the risk and the stigma it brings of bringing a satellite overlay in any significant size to a mobile network and using space-based assets to deliver broadcast to the edge. I doubt a lot of operators, MNOs, will be convinced by that.
That's very interesting.
And the benefits of caching and storing content locally does not just apply to satellite. I mean, they can do the same with their existing fiber and microwave infrastructure that they own and place those services strategically. So it's really nothing that is truly unique with the satellite in this context. In my mind.
You're outlining the problem that held back digital cinema for so long, which is that all the benefit of installing digital systems was going to go to the movie studios, but the people who had to spend the money on them, of course, for a long time, were going to be the theater owners. And then logjam only broke when the movie studios started subsidizing it. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. We are getting close to the edge of this. I hear somebody trying to get into this. Samir, is that you?
No, that's me. Sorry, I just wanted to chime in on one thing. We have tried this a bit, and I think the problem that we've seen is a fundamental problem that I don't think 5G solves. The amount of data it requires to update the cache at the edge is similar to the amount of data it takes to put it there in the first place. So the real question is the amount of data it creates to update the caching every day, is that more than what the users are downloading on a regular basis? And it's actually a pretty difficult equation to work out whether that's the case, but I don't think 5G is going to solve that problem. I think 5G just delivers it faster than the previously we had.
That's a very interesting insight. We are approaching the end of our time together. I had a final question, but I think we've all answered it very specifically, that there's anything ranging from tremendous long-term excitement to right now what we're doing is spending money to protect ourselves against the loss of our C-band spectrum. So we're going to be revisiting this in a couple of years and see how it's begun to come out. So I want to thank very much Samir, Will, Scott, and Richard for sharing this hour with us and giving us, I think, extremely expert views into how this development of this market looks over the next 2, 3, and then years and then into the future. Coming up, WTA will be looking at a number of topics. The next one up is the virtual teleport, which we're editing right now. And that's how virtualization technologies, which were of course also mentioned in today's webinar, are remaking teleport operations and developing new customer opportunities. That'll be our January 21. Coming back from COVID-19 is going to be more of a look at what it's been like for our members in the teleport sector, as well as satellite operators, to adapt to the challenges they've faced and what lessons they're going to carry forward, what they expect ultimately from this recovery. And then later, following it in May, will be our 2021 cloud forecast for teleport operators. We'll be updating a look from a couple of years ago about how cloud services are actually transforming operations and creating market opportunities today as cloud becomes fundamental to the world's information technology platforms. So as I say, we have come to the end. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your questions and comments, and we look forward to seeing you next time. For World Teleport Association, this is Robert Bell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.